Thank you very much. Good afternoon. I know it's Friday, last slot on the Friday. It's a tough gig, so I will try and make this as interesting as possible, I promise. I'll rattle through and hopefully leave a bit of time for questions at the end, so I'll see if I can go as fast as I can so we get plenty of questions in. So I suppose, first of all, who am I? It's Gareth Owen. I'm lead correspondent for ITV News in the Midlands. What does that mean? I mean, that's a slightly misleading and confusing job title, actually. Does it mean that I'm the guy that gets all the top stories? Not really. Does it mean that I'm the guy who comes and swoops in and takes the glory with a live piece to camera after everyone else has done all the hard work? Yeah, quite a lot of the time, but that's not the main thing. Actually, there's a lot of other things that come into it. Hardwired into my contract is a theme which I'm hoping will run through the next hour, which is multi-skilling, because that has become so important in this industry, within media, particularly within ITV, and I'll talk a bit more about that later on. So, taking that job title, first of all, as lead correspondent, comparing it to what it was 20, 30, 40 years ago, it's really different. So, old style, you'd have a moustache, obviously, and he would usually be a he as a lead correspondent, will be on screen the whole time, obviously, would be given loads of resource, so that lead correspondent would get chucked camera crews and edit equipment and producers. They'd be getting all of the lead stories, and they would be concentrating on chasing the story and delivering all these great lives. They'd be sat in the trailer composing, that sort of thing. Effectively, they would do just that one thing and do it really well, but they would just do one thing. That has changed just beyond recognition. So nowadays, I just want to say, I didn't want to put a picture of myself. I thought that'd be horribly vain, so that's my colleague Rajiv up there. Nowadays, the lead correspondent, yes, okay, does stuff on screen, but obviously, almost goes without saying, will self-shoot and self-edit a heck of a lot of stuff. I'd say when I'm out on the road, when I'm not doing a sort of a live broadcast, I'll be on my own with my little camera, 75 to 80% of the time, I would have thought, and you edit a lot of it yourself on this laptop as well, which is such a change. I joined 15 years ago, and it's a world apart. You've also got to, as lead correspondent, be a presenter, and I tend to present sort of evening bulletins. You've also got to do quite demanding newsroom editorial jobs as well. So, program editor, producer, effectively. So you're in the gallery, you're shaping the program, you're writing most of the program as well. News editor, which is a news gathering sort of job where you've got to decide which stories to chase and who to put onto what story. You've also got to be sort of off-screen, looking at big projects, huge things that are coming further down the line, getting involved in planning and delivering those big projects, and really quite mundane stuff like line managing other reporters. So it's a world away, it really is. A little bit then about how I got into it. I've been doing this for 15 years, as I say. I came in at the very junior level at ITV via a bursary from Birmingham City University. I've been at ITV as a contract journalist, so in other words, not really doing anything else, not a freelancer, ever since, and kind of gone up the ladder. But within that, I've done plenty of bits and bobs. I've been political correspondent a few times on attachment. I've been a sport correspondent on attachment. I've produced the late night political discussion show that we have every month as well, and I still produce that quite a lot. I've worked for and still work for ITV National News as a reporter and a producer. I work for ITV Sport on their Champions League and International Football Highlights programme as a reporter on that. And away from ITV, I also do a bit of media training and media consultancy as well. So it kind of opens the doors. This career is great. I mean, if anyone is seriously thinking of going down this sort of route, it's fantastic. It does open loads of doors. There's plenty of variety. Career highlights, well, there's lots. I mean, actually, just sort of uncovering a couple of original stories, or little local council stories, can be fantastic moments. They won't live with you for your whole life. It's not something you'll necessarily remember forever, but they're great. But there are also significant moments. Significant moments. I mean, a lot of it's about politics for me. I've interviewed every prime minister going back to Tony Blair, which is a really privileged position to be in. And it's great to sort of have discussions with those people when you get the chance to. In the middle there, Leicester City, If you're not a fan of Leicester City, I'm afraid there's a bit more later on in the presentation, but being involved in that story in 2016 was just ridiculous, how it grew, how for a year everyone was saying, no, the little Leicester City, they won't actually win anything, to, oh my God, they might, oh my God, they have. And that was a huge thing for us at the time. And at the far end, you'll probably recognise there Kate and Jerry McCann with Madeleine McCann. That's one of the stories probably that affected me most, because very early in my career, and I was sent out to Portugal when she went missing, when it was 2007, I think. It was one of the biggest stories at the time I'd worked on, and it was interesting because there was not much else happening in the news at that time. So I ended up being out there for a month, and there was such a demand for news on that story because there wasn't much else happening in terms of news. So the newspapers were finding little lines on the story. So then news desks in television were then phoning us up and saying, can you find more lines? Can you do more things? So it was a huge learning curve for me. And you know, interestingly now, I've been back a few times to cover that story on anniversaries. And you know, a couple of years ago, the police sent specialists out to dig up an area to search there. And it's interesting going back now as a father of three compared to when I went back out in my 20s at the start of my career. It's quite an affecting story when you get deep into it. And then hopefully one of my career highlights is coming in about 2 weeks, because I'm heading off to Gold Coast, Australia, to cover Commonwealth Games for the ITV regions, which should be really interesting. Now, I was asked to provide a little bit of maybe a few examples of my work. I'll try and play these. These are sort of things from the last couple of years. I assume it's just a straightforward play. Before I do, and before I risk it and see if it works, there's a lot of politics on there because I've been heavily involved in it in the last 3 years, and interesting time to be involved in politics, obviously. What the heck's going on? So a lot of these examples are from the election from last year. We'll start off with, it's not something that was broadcast on the ITV main channel. It's quite interesting. We were trying to work out how to make the coverage a bit different. And it occurred to me that overnight, actually on the election night, there's not a lot happening regionally and locally on telly. Yeah, okay, you get local radio, you get bits on you know, websites and social media. There's not a lot TV-wise happening. And there's good reasons for that in the past. It was far too expensive. We didn't have facilities to go off and send satellite trucks everywhere. And ITV, frankly, wouldn't give us the time on the main channel because they've got the dashing Mr. Tom Bradby, who'd be sort of hogging the limelight. So they wouldn't give regional news the time. But things have happened. Technology has meant that we can do lots of lives. SIM card technology means we don't need satellite trucks anymore. And the platform of Facebook Live means that we can do rolling programs. So we effectively did a bit of an overnight program on Facebook. So this showreel, as it were, starts off with a bit from that, and then it goes on to other election things, and then a bit of the most recent story that I've been involved with. So let's just see if this plays with sound. Fingers crossed. Yes.
Hello, good morning. It is now 1:05 on election night, or election morning, should we say, and this is an ITV News Central Election Special. We are bringing you live updates, reaction and analysis to the Midlands results as they come in through the night, and for the first time we do have some Midlands results to talk about. Let's go straight to those, straight away. Kettering, first of all, in the East Midlands, and this is an interesting one. That is a Conservative hold, no massive surprise about that, but you look at the Labour figures in that. They got 18,000 votes just over. Look at the swing, 11.4% swing to Labour. Yes, the Conservatives went up a bit, Labour went up an awful lot more. The Conservatives holding on to Warwickshire North and Erewash. But it has been a story of increasingly glum-looking Conservative politicians and increasingly cheery-looking Labour politicians. We can go to Derby now. Michael Sibbott is with, I think, one very prominent cheery Labour politician.
Yeah, that's right, Gareth. You joined me just as the...
Yes, interesting to hear what Margaret Thatcher is saying.
Very interesting.
A moderate Labour MP.
More me.
She actually voted for Jeremy Corbyn to get him onto the ballot paper to go into the leadership election. In effect, she lent him her vote to open up the debate within the Labour Party, but had no intention of him ever becoming leader. She famously said back in 2015 that she was a moron for letting Jeremy Corbyn onto the ballot paper. now it looks as though he could be leading them to a very strong result, certainly as far as expectations have been set. Probably about it for us for now. Please do stay with us through the night. We will be back with more updates as more of those Midlands seats come in. We're expecting quite a few of them to come in over the next 2 hours, and we will have a much clearer idea of exactly how the Midlands has voted. So do join us again. So, UKIP want full and immediate withdrawal from anything to do with the EU. They want to cut net immigration to 0 within 5 years, ban full facial religious veils, and reduce the foreign aid budget. The Liberal Democrats want a referendum on the final Brexit deal struck with the EU. They put a penny on income tax to pay for $6 billion to the NHS. They're against grammar schools and would reintroduce maintenance grants for students. Labour are opposed to a second referendum on the EU, but would put the final deal to a vote in Parliament. They'd raise tax on companies and people earning over 80 grand and spend 30 billion of that on the NHS. They plan to renationalise the railways and the utility companies. And the Conservatives, they say Brexit means leaving the customs union and the common market and ending free movement of people. They would increase the personal tax allowance, retain targets for reducing immigration, and although they would scrap free school meals for infants, they would introduce free breakfasts. Polling day is the 8th of June, just 18 days away. And just time left to remind you, if you haven't done it yet already, you have only 6 hours left to register to vote. You can do it online, and hopefully in the next half hour we'll help you decide how to cast that vote. There's something different about this election. It's as though Brexit has thrown some voters up in the air, and they've landed in unexpected places. Tonight we meet 3 Midlands voters who will break the habit of a lifetime next month. They'll swap sides.
Gareth, there is just one more full day of campaigning. Do you get the sense yet of how things are going to pan out in the Midlands?
The short answer, no, not really, not yet anyway. It's difficult. I mean, if you just turned up in the country now and came straight here, you'd think it was probably going to be a pretty stonking Labour landslide. But the opinion polls and the pundits are all still suggesting that it will be probably a fairly comfortable Conservative victory. Although the range of those predictions is pretty wide. You've got some on one end saying it could be a hung Parliament, some on another saying that it might be a landslide, in which case the Conservatives might take seats here in Birmingham, in Coventry, in Stoke-on-Trent, in Wolverhampton. It really is going to be very interesting. We've not got long left to find out what the answer is. When I was here about an hour after the explosion on Sunday night, this was all about a fire, an explosion, the debris, the police tape. Now though, well now we have names, we have faces, we have personal stories attached to this tragedy. The mother and wife in her 40s, with her 2 teenage sons, the college student who was beginning to dedicate her life to helping others, and the young woman about to start her new job. The police have not yet identified officially bodies that have been found, but for those 5 people, we are beginning to fear the worst. A local shop, a family home, now just piles of rubble, twisted metal, and a gaping hole in a Victorian terrace. It's only when you step behind the police cordon that you get a sense of the force of Sunday's blast and the scale of this operation. In the early hours of this morning, this stopped being a search and rescue operation. It became a recovery operation. That's the moment police decided there was no longer any hope of finding anyone alive in this wreckage. They have recovered 5 bodies. It'll be some time until they can be formally identified, but today investigators released the names of the 5 people missing after the explosion. Among them, Mary Raggaby and her 2 sons, Shane and Sean, who lived in the flat upstairs. Also officially missing, Shane's girlfriend, Leah Beth Week. Leah is from Melton Mowbray. Today, some of her friends visited Hindley Road to leave their tributes.
She was just the absolute heart of everyone. Just like a ray of sunshine. Yeah. The most amazing person. She caring, she would do anything for anyone else.
She just wanted to please people constantly.
She only last week got nominated for the Lord Lieutenant Young Volunteer Award for Laura. She got an absolute heart of gold.
Yeah, she just cared about everything.
Yeah.
Whatever the weather delivers here for the rest of the week, the police and fire crews are clear. They'll do what it takes to clear the site, identify the dead, and find answers.
And Gareth, as we saw in your report, you know, obviously a devastating effect on those who knew the people believed to have been killed in this horrendous incident, but also a deeply large effect on the wider community as well, hasn't there?
Yes, Matt, there's a number of sides to this actually. On the one hand, you've got a community coping remarkably well, people turning up and offering cupcakes and hot drinks to rescuers. There are those who come here, as you can see, to lay flowers in tribute. But there are a number of people who still don't know when they can get back into their homes, when they can open up their businesses again. It is a troubling time for them. And they are being encouraged to turn up at what is now being called a rest centre at St Anne's Church, from where Nancy Cole now reports.
Okay, so that's a bit of a roundup of some of the recent reporting work, and that's kind of a fairly typical show reel that a correspondent would bring and show you. But because we're talking about variety, because we're talking about this multi-skilling, I also wanted to show you the other side. As well as doing the on-the-screen stuff, I have to now, to kind of make my way through my career, look at off-screen stuff. And I found in the last few years when I'm doing that, actually I end up enjoying it a bit more, because I'm taking control of something, an idea, I'm seeing it through to fruition. Sometimes I'm sitting there making decisions on live television. It's the kind of the conducting the orchestra thing. So I just want to show you a little bit of well, a couple of the programmes that I've been involved in producing and sort of been in charge of in the last couple of years. And you can see the sort of the variety given comparing it when I was doing the reporting to when you're doing producing. If you hate Leicester City, it's probably best if you don't bother watching this. But going on, there you go.
Now, ITV News Central brings you a special programme. Samina Ali Khan reports live from Leicester City's Opens Up Bus Parade.
Good evening. Just look and listen to that. It is the biggest party Leicester has ever seen. An estimated 250,000 people have come out to catch a glimpse of the Premier League trophy and the players and their manager who won it. Welcome to ITV News Central, Leicester Champions Parade.
I'll do a bit of talking over some of this. So, basically, as you know, a couple of years ago, Leicester won the Premier League, and it became obvious to us that the parade that all these teams do was going to be happening in our airtime, which threw us into panic. We don't do these sorts of programmes very often. We do studio programmes where we link into packages. But we had to suddenly pull out all the stops because it was going to be happening while we were on air, so we ended up buying in loads of different live sources, reporters everywhere, and it was a bit of a headache. So she was where we were thinking was the main point of the celebration. He was at the start of the parade, and I was sort of sat in the gallery praying that this parade started on time at 6 o'clock, and it did, thank goodness.
The city has turned out in tens of thousands to support them. There is the man who led them at the front, Claudio Ranieri, with his team of heroes. Listen to the roar.
And with most of our programmes, we have strict running orders. Most links are kind of written. Most of the packages, the reports, have got timings associated with them, so we know how long things are going to be, we know how every second is accounted for. With this, it was pretty much a blank running order, and we were telling people just to talk and to film and to say what they saw, which you don't do very often. But yeah, it was great fun to be involved in.
A welcome through the city that they have put on the map right around the globe, passing through Jubilee Square, where fans have been lined up for hours and hours. From the helicopter above, you can see how many people are here. We are told there are over 100,000. There are even estimates there could be nearly 250,000 to see their team, the team that has put Leicester City firmly on not just the footballing map, but the world stage. The buses, 4 of them, passing through now. on their onward journey, supported by thousands, supported by all the people here. And Sam, you have got a treat in store when it gets to you.
We're going to have a fabulous welcome.
In fact, if we ever do an outside broadcast in regional television, it's normally one location with perhaps two cameras, and we think that's being a bit flash. In effect, we have to have, I think, 4 of those units dotted around the city because it moves through.
What's happening where you are?
Sam, it is so loud here. This is the last of the 4 coaches that has just passed. You might still be able to see in the distance some of the players on top of their coach. The volume went through the roof as the players moved through this part of town. It was very, very quick and absolutely on time. Look at all these people over here. We've got the police horses here. But look at these people in the windows of this betting shop here. Of course, it was 5,000 to 1. The chances of Leicester winning the Premier League at one point. Oh my goodness, a lot of these fans wish they'd put money on it. Let's speak to some of them now. How was it seeing the players go past?
Oh, it's fantastic to see them. They're amazing.
The Outlaws have arrived in just over my shoulder. Here it is. That's the first of 4 buses that, as we know, are coming down on their parade.
So I mean, I won't show loads and loads. This is sort of a real thing we've had for awards. But yeah, so a live guest that Samina, the main presenter's got there with her as well. Yeah, I mean, a lot of that was, you know, I had to do the kind of the planning, the logistics. So we had to be talking to the club and the council and the police, trying to guess where routes were going. May not surprise you that Leicester City did not expect to win the Premier League, so they had no plan in place. In fact, to be honest, they had no idea what they were doing, so it was a little bit chaotic. They had no idea where the route was going to go, how many people to expect. So there was a lot of paperwork. There was a lot of really quite boring logistics, but under pressure because you've got to do it in a week. We've got another location coming up here where we've got a colleague who's going to be at Victoria Park. There we go, so there's another location, which is where the big sort of party with Kasabian performing was happening at the end of the parade route.
This is where the players are going to be. It has been wrapped here all day, and in the last half an hour or so, it's got even more busy. There are literally tens of thousands of people already, and we're expecting to get much busier. But even at 11 o'clock this morning, when we arrived here, there were already people trying to get their space to make sure they got the best view for this party this evening.
And also this involved a lot of kind of liaising with national news as they were covering it, and we're kind of borrowing each other's resources, and we had very fraught negotiations to get this location because there were also copyright issues. So I suppose the reason I'm showing you this in comparison to the reporting work is that these days you've got to be able to do everything. Back in the day, I'd be a correspondent just doing those things that I did at the first war. Now I have to do all the kind of the backstage stuff, which used to be specialist producers. So I suppose that's really the message I kind of want to get through throughout this. I won't show you. I did have the Brexit programme lined up, but I'll spare you that one. So we're in a little short time. But yeah, so I just want to talk now a little bit and introduce the idea of 2 routes to success within the media. The one I spoke about before is multi-skilling. I'll come to that in a moment. But there is another one, which is specialism. You can achieve what you want to do in journalism and the media, concentrating on just one thing, and you have to be hyper-specialised. You've got to really just go in for a niche. It's high risk and high reward. You're out on your own, but you know you can create a niche, create a unique selling point, really, some specialist knowledge, be it in an area of the economy, be it in an area of the arts, whatever it might be, and you just build a brand online. You create Instagram, YouTube channels, you create a website, you get yourself out on social media. And increasingly, that's been really, really successful for people. So it's those who don't want to go down and be a generalist, but they're concentrating on one thing. But you've got to throw yourself into this completely. And I'd say it is pretty risky. because you don't have the security blanket of a great big organisation behind you and a pension and all sorts of other things. You may have to, after a year or so, be a bit pragmatic and say, you know what, it's not perhaps working for me. But, you know, it can do. I'd say the guy there is the best known example of this. He was a BBC reporter, junior reporter a very long time ago, Martin Lewis, and then he threw himself into personal finance journalism, which doesn't sound desperately exciting, but there wasn't really anyone else doing that at the time. He said, no, I'm just concentrating on that. It was so narrow. I don't know if anyone's gone to his website when he said inexpert.com, but you know, the detail in there looks pretty boring on the face of it, but he committed himself to that, built the brand online, and he sold his website for an absolute fortune. And he's now just, you know, a hired face on telly and does very, 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 very well at it. So yeah, high risk, high reward. I don't have the nerve to go down that route, so I can't really talk too much about that. I can talk about this multi-skilling route, where you've got to go and you try your hand at everything, literally everything. I don't just mean specialist areas. I don't just mean, you know, politics and sport or anything like that, but also producing and reporting. But even beyond that, get into the technicalities of it as well. Make sure you know how a camera works. Make sure you know how the satellite lines work and all of that sort of thing, because that is how newsrooms are developing. Journalists cannot get away with just being people in the corner with a notebook anymore. If you can develop these sorts of skills, you will be in demand. And it leads to success in the kind of the large-scale media companies, I would say. So whereas niches might, sort of your specialisms might bring you success in a sort of niche area, in your own website, in your own business, to be successful in places like the BBC, like ITV, Sky, Guardian, Huffington Post, Vice, you know, the list goes on and on and on. You've got to have an awareness of all areas of production. So, next question is why multi-skilling? Why has it become so important? You'll see there are a couple of headlines, and it affects the company I work for, because I lived through this a little bit. ITV was pretty much on the verge, not so very long ago, certainly when I was still working on it. ITV was on the verge of, ITV News was on the verge of being axed. Certainly regional news was definitely on the verge of being axed. National news was going to be cut right back. ITV generally was in a really bad place, and in other places it was happening too. And why? Well, it was the old story of the town challenges from online. These big companies could not get their head around what to do about online. With ITV there are other issues as well, we won't go into that. But with the challenges from online, people couldn't work out how to monetize content, people couldn't work out how to deal with the competition, and they were just losing money hand over fist. But online and new technologies, in a funny sort of way, as well as being a threat, suddenly came right to the rescue. And a lot of these places were saved by new technologies. Because technology has actually made journalism a lot cheaper. Some of the stuff that we do, the election night programme, I was going live to, I think there was about 10 reporters in 10 different locations, and most of them just tethering a camera to an iPhone. They're cheap. And there's all sorts of other, it's sort of democratised the whole thing. So it's allowed people to set up their own YouTube channels, so people can do something in their own bedroom. It's also allowed big companies like ITV to try things that perhaps they couldn't do before, and to move into other areas, and to keep going, because they could afford to cut costs. There's a downside, obviously, because a lot of people did lose their jobs. And a lot of old jobs, certainly in the sort of 2000s and moving through the turn of the decade, just simply disappeared. And that was a pretty difficult time, and a pretty upsetting time. But moving through that now, it's kind of saved the industry to an extent. There's still loads and loads and loads of challenges, don't get me wrong. I don't think that the future's necessarily completely secure yet. But it's made things cheaper, it's made things easier for these type of places to do. But multi-skilling is the key to it. If you go in and show an interest in all areas of the newsroom, if you go in and show interest in the technical side, and in producing, and in going out and filming stuff, and in doing extra stuff online that might sort of get social media following. If you show an interest across the board, you'll fly in these industries, in these sorts of organisations. So if there's one message to go away from today, I'd say that is probably it. Now, I finished a little bit earlier because I cut out the other video, and actually that other video is probably a bit longer than I thought. We were actually quite early finishing on the talk. But I'm happy to take a few questions. I'll do first, actually.
How did they change their content up after, you said they had the big issue with online technology? How did they sort it? ITV, I'll talk about ITV first and then about the broader industry. The answer is no one really, it's still in flux. But ITV, they tried to address it into directly the online competition. Firstly, by recognising what they were good at, so saying that online is huge, but actually still a vast majority of the audience watch linear TV, so not panicking. So I think that was important. So they concentrated on what they were good at as a TV company. And then they tried to just move with it and move with the changing trends a little bit. So we had a website which until very recently had been set up as a breaking news service. It was like a timeline type thing. It was a live feed type website. Not Twitter, but it's that sort of feel. It had articles, it had videos, it's that sort of thing. And it was all about breaking news. It was like, let's get that stuff out there really, really quickly. But then we had a bit of a refresh. We looked at the figures, and it started off great, actually. But they've fallen right off, and people just weren't coming to the website. And then you look at where people were coming, and they were flocking to our Facebook page. In astonishing numbers. And more so than the BBC, actually, in the first place. So we think, okay, what's happening? How can we make this work? And then you look around and you think, the way people are consuming this has changed. Suddenly, a few years ago, you'll know, the auto roll-on videos when you're scrolling through. And suddenly that means, actually, maybe we should do more videos. And you talk to people in Huffington Post and The Guardian, and they'll be saying, God, I wish we had lots of video. That's where online is now. It used to be text 10 or 5 years ago, and we could do that. Now it's all about video. And we're a print organisation, or we're an online written organisation, and we're struggling to get the video. Whereas ITV suddenly realised, you know what, we've got loads of video. Because, we go out and shoot stuff. Quite often the stuff we go out and shoot, we don't even use on telly. We've only got half an hour every day, certainly regional news. So that led to the penny dropping a little bit. So we've ditched that live stream type website now. And we're only looking to maybe do 1, 2, 3 updates a day. But all of them are these kind of shareable little videos. You'll know the type, there's a bit of music in the background and a lot of text. It's a big headline text which tells the story, so you don't need to have your iPhone sound up. It's designed for the scroll auto read thing on the train. So they changed that. And I don't know, is that working? I'm not sure, because it's only happened in the last sort of year or so, and they've not really looked at the numbers. But I think that's one of the answers. But I don't think there is really a definitive answer. No one quite knows. There's still a bit of panic in the industry. You look around. A while ago, people were saying that paywalls weren't going to work. The Times were behind the paywall, and everyone was saying, well, it's going to be a disaster. And actually now, it seems that people are willing to pay these subscriptions. More and more people are going behind the paywalls. So I don't think there is that. I think it's up for debate. It's constantly changing. And I suppose my point there was that although there is still that pressure from online and those challenges from online, we've also got to realise that the technology that's come with online, the SIM technology, the broadband technology, the phones, the kind of smaller laptop kits and everything, has meant that we can do what we used to do, the traditional journalism, much easier and much more cheaply. And that's really that's helped, and I think that's saved traditional journalism, at least for the medium term. Excuse me. Longer term, who knows? Looking back at the industry, when I started, which was 15 years ago, it's completely changed beyond all recognition. If any of you guys want to be going into that industry, just be aware that there'll be massive changes, changes that you can't even imagine right now will happen in the next 5 years as well. So yeah, I think it's just a case of being flexible and moving, which these companies didn't do at the start of the impact, and now they are. I'll come to you in a second. I'm still going to do this.
Can you tell us about how you find like what streets we use?
Yeah, I mean, my answer to this is always quite irritating to people, because I'll be talking to people who have worked really hard to try and get into it, and I say, oh, I fell into it, and I sort of did, but there are things that you can take from it as well. I mean, I had no idea what I wanted to do genuinely at university. I did a history degree at Cardiff University, and I was loving being at university. I was into music at the time, so I had a little radio program back home. I lived kind of Shropshire, Welsh border area, so I just did it. I was let to have my own show every evening, or every Wednesday evening. So off you go and play what you want, which is great. I don't think anyone listened. It was just me mucking around with music. But I really enjoyed that. And I went to the boss of the radio station and I said, I'd love to keep doing this, but I don't think there's a career in it, because I don't think anyone's listening. I'm not sure where the money's going to come. He said, well, look, why don't you read the news to us on our station? Because, if you become a journalist, you can join a union, it's a career then. So I just read their news for a little bit. And then the station expanded. They took on other stations and they said, oh, well, we need somebody to kind of be in charge of a hub now. So I was kind of news editor of this hub of 3 stations. Again, which is misleading me, because not only was I news editor, I was the only member of staff in the newsroom, so I was sort of everything. Did that for a bit, realised I was probably being exploited because I was working about 18-hour days to get it all done, and then went off and did a proper training course at Birmingham City University. At the start of that, we were all interviewed for various bursaries at BBC, ITV, and Heart FM as well. We're doing one. I got the ITV one, which meant I had a job contract for 6 months. They paid the fees, so I went along and said no to that. And I just stayed there, really, and that's how I got into it. But I think it's sort of different but similar now. I think inevitably everyone has to go through the academic route these days, which I think university that's fine. Probably 2001, 2002 when I was doing it, some people could still get away with getting into it without a degree. I think you need to now go through a problem because there's so many of these courses around. I think that the other thing is that you use the internet to your advantage. We were talking about specialisms. You can use a little bit of the lessons of that to get yourself out there and get yourself noticed. So you can just start doing your own journalism and sort of talking about technologies that are really cheap and don't have to. So go out and play around. Get a website, get some blogs up there, get some bits and bobs up there, and then just. And this is the one thing that hasn't changed from before. Then just annoy everyone, email everyone, phone everyone, and say, look, there's my work, that's what I can do. Because nowadays you can do that. I mean, when I was starting, you couldn't really use it on the phone and they take it and trust that you were any good. Maybe you could send a few words of copy that you've written, but that was about it. Now you just say, look, I can package, I can do radio, I can do whatever it is. Yes, that's what I'd say.
Would you see yourself saying ITV?
What do I want to do when I grow up? I think it's a good question. The reason I've said ITV for so long, and believe me, there have been moments, especially going down that sort of time where I thought, I'm off, is that I get given the opportunities to go off and do other things. So, I mean, I've worked in sports and politics, I've done behind camera, in front of camera, and it's the range. I think as long as that's still there, I'll stick around. I mean, the options for me, I could become a head of news for a region. That's probably the next obvious step. But I mean, I might say, you know what, to hell with it. I might go freelance. I might, do a little bit of media consultancy now, so I might go try something like that. I'm always kind of looking for new opportunities. I mean, on a personal note, it's like get all of you moving around to different cities done before you have kids. Because suddenly when you have kids, jobs are offered in London and you go, oh, I can't. So, who knows? Do you have a question?
Yeah, asking about when you worked in the sports side? Did you just work in the football sector or did you do like different sports?
Well, there's two bits to this. A number of times I've been kind of stand-in sports correspondent for ITV Central, which is all sports, it's everything. And because the ITV region doesn't have a massive sports team, in fact, often it only have one per region, you go out, you find stories, you kind of generate stuff, you go out to press conferences, you interview managers and players, you go to matches, you cover them that way, you do the social media stuff as well. Although the one thing to always bear in mind, especially when it's ITV regional news, is who the viewers are. And it's really awkward with sport because the viewers to ITV regional news are split into two. Those who hate sport with an absolute all-consuming passion, and then those who love it and are there to try and see their team, their local team. And it's getting that balance is really difficult because if you try and cut down sport content to getting a kind of interesting news item from what don't like sport, then you get fans of Walsall saying, why didn't you even mention us tonight? You know, why didn't you even mention us? So it's kind of, it's a tricky thing. So, but with that, you've also got to remember that sport coverage, you've got to make it a bit more accessible to people. So it's not just the like, you know, transfer fees and growing strains, it's not that sort of thing for with our sports. It's stuff, you know, it's the personalities behind it, it's personal stories, human interest stories. That's really important as well. The other side of the sport thing though, because I mentioned ITV Sport, which is slightly different, I'm kind of one of the few people who works in the regions that if they need some help down in London, they'll give me a call. And that's great, that's a great thing to do every now and again because they've got a huge team there. We're running out of sports that we cover. I think we've got the rights to an awful lot now. We've got the horse racing recently, we've won that. But we've still got the Champions League highlights, and we've got the England games live, and we've got some international games. And the programmes that I work on down there will just be football, and they will be largely, I get given a certain number of games, maybe 6 or 7 games, I get to sort of watch them, and I've got to write 40 seconds of words on each, and then I go and sort of deliver them in a voiceover booth to the pictures. It's a world apart as well, because national TV still has quite a lot of money sloshing around it, so you sit down most of the day there on the backside not doing a great deal, people bring you coffee and stuff, it's great. And then you go into deliver your voiceover and go home. I mean, if that was in regional news, people would touch the ground, you know. But yeah, it's a good ride. Do you have a question?
I hadn't two questions. I was just putting my hand up to one of them who watches the news. Why are they giving off that over to sport?
Oh yeah, yes.
Great.
It's because I suppose
it really does. I get so excited. Or news note, which should be about news and politics, and then they go, here's half an hour on Leicester.
Yeah. Yeah, no, it's true, and it divides people. It's a nightmare to try and. You get reactions like that on both sides of the coin. You'll get emails like that on both sides of the coin. You're like, how do I do that? How do we bridge it? But I mean, with regional news in particular, which is obviously what I spend most of my time in, it's often the only opportunity that people will get on a big telly. I mean, obviously, see the goals on the internet. If you support a little team, a local team, the only chance you get to see those goals on a big telly sometimes, so that's why we still do it, and that's why we get very, very cross as we go. So is there a problem?
Yeah, so you know about the planet, so like, because you know ITV, they don't really have like, you know, because they have Champions League highlights, and you don't have like, you know, football highlights, you know, like, you know, the Premier League. How do you find that balance?
Well, I mean, we're restricted to what we can do by what rights we've got. So in terms of programming, only put out what we've got rights for. In terms of coverage on the news, we've got a thing called Sports Access Code, which means that within a certain time frame you can use a bit of stuff off other channels. So we will record football off BBC and Sky, we'll record the rugby off BBC One or whatever it might be, and then you can use a little bit of that, you can use a certain amount of that to tell the story, but you don't want to go, you don't want it to be too long. So to be honest, most of our restrictions are not in terms of what rights we've got, we don't have. It's more about its editorial, it's saying that's not all people. I sense that divide might be happening in this room in terms of sport and non-sport. So is Is there anything else away from sport?
With some of the stories you talked about looking at, like that story how that girl died, it seems like you get exposed to some really heavy stuff. Is that
Oh God,
something
yeah.
you have to consider before going into a job role like that?
Yeah, you should consider it. I mean, it's interesting actually. I'm not sure I did consider it when I first went into this. I was sort of having fun with, running around doing interviews and writing stuff, and when I got into TV, sort of creating a telly and everything. I don't think I did think that through, and it's amazing how you do develop an ability to kind of compartmentalise it. So you're talking to these distraught people in Leicester, which I was 2 weeks ago, whatever it was now, and it is really upsetting. But at the time, it sounds awful. I'm sitting there thinking, there's the sound of it. It's terrible, and I feel like I'm a bad person saying this. But you're under time pressure, and you know you've got to get it into a package, and you constantly like that'll work. But it's when you then go home and you go, and it is tricky. And some stories will affect you more than others. Some stories that perhaps you don't even expect will affect you, do affect you. And talking about the management account thing, as I said, when I did it first in 2007, I was relatively young, I was relatively new to the game. It was very much for me a new story. I could see the storylines unfolding out in the wax chase and what to get the angles and everything. There were human elements, yeah, and there was this time when you come away at the end of the day and think, oh yeah, that was heavy. But then, when I went back and I had 3 kids of my own, suddenly it was a whole different level, and actually that was tricky when I was going to film them, and I was sort of start shooting that on my own, and when I was filming and digging up this land, which you might be there, that was really tough. I found that. But yeah, I think it's always something you've got to bear in mind that there's tough stuff and you should think about it when you cope with it. But most people who've gone through the process, who do the journalism training, they are able to do that compartmentalised. I don't know why it's not something that goes towards it. Just what did you say? How
Yeah. In fact, this might be cheeky because we have journalists, courses, journalist students in the building. But given what you're saying about the change in traditional journalism to much more recent journalism, I initially wanted to study journalism before I studied this course, and I knew I'd have to learn things like shorthand and use Quark Express and specific technologies that seem not to be so important now. So I guess the question is the field of journalism much more open to those who haven't studied straight journalism, so media communication students or media production students who have different skills, but that alongside multi-skills are able to offer something else?
The one absolutely fundamental, I sit on a lot of boards, interview boards, people coming in to get jobs, and we will look at people who have not done the traditional journalism course. Yes, of course, but the absolute fundamentals is law. If you don't have the law, forget it. So if there's one element that is missing perhaps from others, which is in the journalism course, it's definitely the legal stuff, because companies don't have time to train people up on law. We have refresher courses, but they don't have time to do the full legal course. Other bits to it, I mean, shorthand, depends what you want to be doing. I don't have shorthand, I've never had shorthand. My handwriting looks like shorthand, but that's a different thing. I think it's useful. Sometimes I've been sat in court doing court reports, and I'm looking over at the local newspaper guys, and I think, oh, I wish I had shorthand, because I'm there trying to copy what the judge says. It feels useful there. It's useful if you are a political reporter full time and you're up in the gallery of House of Commons, and you kind of, that is useful as well. But it's nowhere near what it used to be. I mean, certainly for broadcast. All of our interviews are on camera, obviously. You can watch it back afterwards. Even to the extent, I mean, the newspaper guys hate us because we don't even take a pen or a notebook, because we just say, can you give me your name? Don't even write names down, well, it's all on tape. So I think if you're into a certain sort of journalism, shorthand is vital, but it's not for most journalists, I'd say. But I think that those who are on more other courses that look at other areas of media should definitely consider coming into news, because they'll have skills that others won't have. They'll have other apply to. So that's useful, but it's useful also to be drilled in the essentials. So I would say it's possible, but the journalism courses, the traditional journalism courses, still have a really useful fundamental part of the ethics, compliance, really important.
So postgraduate studies that dealt with those specific aspects would be useful alongside it.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, there's certainly courses. The course that I did, because I did my history course as an undergraduate. The postgrad course that I did was only 6 months long. I don't think that exists anymore, but and that did just cover real basics. So that would work.
Then I'll have the last one. Then it's dead quick. Tony, Gordon, David, Teresa. Who was the nicest?
It's really interesting. I've got different questions, different answers, depending on what it was. I would say instantly. I'd say Tony Blair, because he did have all that whole thing. I was first time I had to do with him. I was producing a special program where he was the main guest. We were doing it. We set up a studio in a school in Nottingham, and he was kind of the main guy. The whole program was about him, obviously. He was also doing another visit of the school. He was up there, and I was getting a bit nervous because it was like 6:50. It was my program. He wasn't there, and I saw him in the corridor nipping into a room, and I was kind of nagging the press officer saying, "Hello, we're on air like in 30 seconds." And he was just saying, "Yeah, he's got a call with the Middle East." And I was like, "Okay, fine. Well, my program is important to me." Eventually, he came in with about 15 seconds to spare. Knew everyone's name, my name, floor manager's name, camera operator's name, the guests that we got lined up. Hello, chatting. So he was great. He did that whole kind of schmoozing thing. Working through them. Gordon Brown, when you interviewed him, was like, oh my God, it really was sort of doer. There was nothing there, nothing at all. But they then interviewed him after he left office, and he was one of the nicest people I've ever met. He was laughing and joking. He was absolutely lovely. I think the office does that to people, and the same I'd say as well with Ed Miliband. I interviewed Ed Miliband, he's not one of those, but I interviewed Ed Miliband. Same thing. Glaze behind the eyes. I thought, well, this is useless, and then I actually didn't interview him. I bumped into him at something, doing Westminster. He was brilliant. He was one of the funniest men I've ever met. That doesn't say much, does it? So that was good. And then David Cameron I wasn't a fan of. He really was. I think he was the real deal. Sort of glaze behind the eyes, going through the robotics. And Theresa May. Again, before becoming Prime Minister, I think it's the job that does it. Before becoming Prime Minister, when she was Shadow Home Secretary, I think to be the first relaxed fine, and then interviewed during the election campaign. Admittedly, this was like the day after she did, I don't know if anyone was into politics and remembers the infamous moment at the start of the turn, she was doing a speech in Wrexham and she started screaming, "Nothing has changed," and that was sort of the moment we knew everything's changed. And I interviewed her the next day, and she was like, I'd say probably Tony Blair, but I get the feeling that was now.
So last tip of the day, do something you love or you're friend of a robot.
Oh God, yeah. Okay.
Hey, thank you very much.